All right, welcome everybody to our spring or late spring Oriental fruit fly update for San Bernardino County, brought to you by the Master Gardeners and Master Food Preservers. The Master Gardeners are an enthusiastic bunch of plant people who love talking about plants and sharing research-based information. Our group is a volunteer-based group, or our organization is a volunteer-based organization. And each county has a Master Gardener program. In our county, we have about 160 or 170 Master Gardeners, and they go through an 18-week training course, learn everything from the soil to pests to plant selection to tree care and everything in between, bugs and all that stuff. And so if you're interested in that, the class will be starting up again in the fall. It runs about, like I said, about 18 weeks, so about October to February. Applications usually go out in July. And if you go to our website, you can find a link where on the left-hand side it says Become a Master Gardener, and you can get on the waiting list. There's no commitment, but you'll be notified when the application is out. And our goal as volunteers and as a program is to get research-based information out to the public. Definitely with this fruit fly, there's a lot of information out there. It's not really a lot of misinformation, but definitely some confusion. So that's one of our goals, was sharing information about pests in the areas, just getting everybody on the same page. In addition to Master Gardeners, we have in our county Master Food Preservers. Every county in California has a Master Gardener program, but not every county has a Master Food Preserver program. So we're really fortunate to have them, and their goal is to get research-based information out on safe food preservation. And they'll also I have a few slides. I am a Master Food Preserver volunteer, as well as being part of the Master Gardener program. So I have a few slides on that at the end. We have a nutrition program, 4-H, an environmental education program, and advisors. And our general goal is to represent the University of California and get research-based information out to the public. We have a seed library as part of our program where people donate seeds to us, and we give those out to the public for free. So if you see us at an event or you know we're going to be doing an in-person presentation, we usually have seeds. So come check that out. And then we do have free monthly seed saving classes online. The last month's presentation was about planning your summer seed garden. And we are here to help. So in addition to presentations, we have our helpline where you can call us or email us and we can answer questions. And you can also find us the second Saturday of each month at the Highland Library. So we'll be there this Saturday from 11 to 1. And then usually it's the second Sunday of each month from 11 to 1 online. But this month it's going to be the third Saturday. So that's where you can find us. We're here to answer your plant questions. You know, what is this bug? What's wrong with my tree? What should I plant right now? All those questions, we're here to help. Okay, so for tonight's topics, I've got a few bug updates, my little public service announcements. We have information on IDing the fly and its importance. I'll have an update for you guys on the quarantine and just kind of general information on what you can do, some preservation techniques, and feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. So I always do a little public service announcement. I'm a citrus lover. I love citrus. I was at an event a few months ago and they had this beautiful thing of citrus out. Somebody had brought it and they brought it with all these leaves. And I was like, oh no. We want to make sure we're not packing a pest intentionally or unintentionally. And on those citrus leaves, there may be this tiny insect, the Asian citrusillid, which is right here on the lower right-hand side. And that bug might be coming in carrying a bacteria that's fatal to citrus. The bacteria isn't harmful to people, but it is fatal to citrus, and it will kill a tree within about 10 years. So the bacteria and the insect that spreads it, the insect, Asian citrusillid, is in Southern California. If you do live near the Ontario area or know people in the Ontario area of San Bernardino County, there's a lot of activity out of the like most of the trees that have been found with this disease in San Bernardino County are in the Ontario area. So a lot of bacteria in that area being spread by these tiny insects. So together we can help prevent the spread of this disease. There is no cure yet, but together we can help prevent the spread of the disease by not sharing fruit with stems and leaves, because just like this great picture here with these beautiful fruits, but the leaves, the insect or its larvae might be accidentally hiding on those leaves, and they're very tiny. We don't want to share cuttings because a healthy looking tree may have that bacteria and it could spread to other trees. And then you want to keep ants out of your trees. That will help keep the beneficial predators coming in because the ants will keep beneficial predators away. So this is something you see a lot of times in the spring. If you have citrus, the spring and fall, you'll see this kind of damaged silvery looking tracks on your leaves. Maybe it looks like snails or slugs or something on your plants and a lot of curling. This is caused by the leaf miner. So this one is mostly cosmetic. So I just always like to let people know this is common to see on your citrus in the spring and fall. In May, we're a little bit past, at least in my trees. I'm not seeing as much of this, but it's just spread by this tiny moth, mostly cosmetic, so just not something to be alarmed about. That citrus screening disease that I mentioned, these are the symptoms where you'll see asymmetrical yellowing. And this is the symptoms of those fatal diseases. So I could talk about that all day, but this is just a little public service announcement. If you have information, if you have questions and would like information on the disease, you can reach out to our Master Gardener helpline, or I'm happy to answer questions at the end on that. And together we can help prevent the spread of the disease with those 3 easy steps. Don't share stems and leaves with fruit because this insect is about the size of a half a grain of rice and its larvae and eggs are even smaller. Don't share cuttings because the tree could look healthy, but actually have the bacteria within it. And then you want to keep ants out of your plants once again, because they'll protect these insects. These insects excrete little sugary solutions as part of their excrement. And the ants love those. So the ants protect these from ladybugs, syrphid fly larvae, praying mantis, all the good beneficial bugs we try to bring in, the ants keep out. Another thing you want to be on the lookout as your figs are fruiting this year, if you're starting to have figs fall off when they're green and they're not ripening, look for these tiny holes, this kind of damage. It could be the black fig fly that has been found in western San Bernardino County. And so just be on the lookout for that if you've got any sudden fruit drop or immature fruit drop. And you can reach out to our helpline, or you can go online and look up black fig fly. And I put in UC IPM, the Integrated Pest Management, if you like to do your own research. That's a great website. So just want to let you know about that. This is the time when people might be camping. So a little reminder that there is the gold spotted oak borer. This is a tiny beetle you can see on a penny here. This one is mostly spread by people in firewood. Causes a lot of damage in our forests, has been found in Oak Glen and Wrightwood and a few other places near Oak Glen, and it's really devastating oak trees. It causes the trees to basically, these tiny exit holes are from the insect, but when there's enough of them, they'll basically starve the tree by damaging the tissue around the tree. So want to be on the lookout for that, these D-shaped exit holes. But the main thing you can do is if you are camping or you know people who are camping, don't bring firewood and move it over a long distance. So they have a campaign, burn it where you buy it. So that's my little PSA on gold spotted oak borers, and the takeaway message is just burn it where you buy it. Don't be moving firewood. And also, if you dislike these mosquitoes as much as I do, this is the Aedes or tiger mosquito. This, they call it, look at the ankle biting. Ah, it's a horrible mosquito. They have started doing sterile releases of the mosquito, or they're going to, I guess, in June. So for those of you guys where these striped mosquitoes have been like ruining your life, just want to give you a little heads up that LA County and I think San Bernardino County, this was from LA County, and they're starting to do sterile releases to help reduce the population of these darn mosquitoes. And the other thing, because these are a Nile, like these are like a floodplain mosquito, so they can just lay eggs in the thinnest film of water. So just be on the lookout for any moisture that you've got collecting around. They say not to have the little saucers in the bottom of your plants and stuff like that. So that's my little public service announcement on those bugs. So for the Oriental fruit fly, if you're not familiar with what it looks like, this is the fly. It's a little bit larger than an average house fly. And the larvae is a little bit larger than an average maggot. So it's characterized by clear wings, has this yellowish body color, and the female has the little pointy tip to lay eggs. And so I was always thinking like that fruit flies are those little flies that I get in the kitchen, the kind of like gnats. These are quite a bit larger. So this is what it looks like as an adult. I have a picture and a little bit of the larvae. And it's pretty much just spreading over the world as international travel has expanded, with airplanes and you could see it was really interesting if you're tracking invasive pests. It was really interesting to hear the different things that were going on and not going on during COVID. I mean, clearly we're moving these bugs all over the planet. So, this is a relative of a med fly. There's a few other quarantines in California right now. There's a Tau fruit fly and a Queensland fruit fly. There's a Mexican fruit fly. We have the Oriental fruit fly. And so there's a bunch of invasive fruit flies in California right now. But you can see they're fairly large, pretty easy to spot. The way that they do the quarantines is based on their life cycle. So if you have ever watched like CSI or you read mystery novels, they can detect how long a body has been there by how old the fly larvae are based on the temperatures. And so the flies or other insects will like mature at a specific rate. And so based on the temperature, they'll say, okay, one life cycle for this fly is going to be 30 days, for example. So once, and they have regular trapping that goes on throughout counties to be on the lookout for invasive flies. So once an invasive fly has been detected, then it starts a clock. And the clock starts a countdown. And when they find that first fly, then there have to be 3 life cycles before they end the quarantine. So once they found the Oriental fruit fly in San Bernardino County, it was found in like the Redlands area. Then they picked a date. It was first detected in the end of September. So then they picked a date, which must have been sometime in like March or something like that, or a little bit earlier. And so where the quarantine will end. So for this fly, if you want to read more about the industry, there's more on the industry on these blogs. And here's some general resources. But so this fly, once it is established over here in Redlands, this is the current quarantine. And so as they've continued to find more flies, the end date of the quarantine just keeps moving forward. This fly infests over 230 types of fruits. And so it doesn't infest the leafy parts of the plant, like the Asian citrusillid that's spreading that citrus greening disease. That can be found on the leafy parts of the plant. It doesn't stay on the fruit. This fly lays its eggs in the fruit, and it likes slightly immature fruit. And what it does is it lays its eggs in the fruit. The eggs hatch. The larvae emerges. Let's see, I'm pretty sure I have. The larvae emerges. It's quite gross. I should have warned you guys. The larvae emerges and it will eat the fruit. And then when it's ready to go into its next life cycle, the pupa, it will drop into the ground. So these flies are looking for host plants to lay eggs in, or host fruit to lay eggs in. And then they also feed on the juices of fruit. So they're really problematic. And in this quarantine, you are not supposed to move any fruit off your property at all. So with the idea of the fly, like normally for the Asian citrusillid, for example, we'll be like, or, any of these pests, it's like, okay, this is what the pest looks like. You want to look for this type of pest. You want to make sure you properly identify it, and then you're going to manage it. Same thing with this. You would want to make sure it is the black fig fly. You would want to make sure that you're managing that particular pest, and you would manage it in a specific way. For the gold-spotted oak borer, the management techniques aren't very effective in terms of treating it with like pesticides, and they're not very practical like an oak forest. So what you do is you prevent the spread by not moving wood that might have this insect in it. Same thing with the citrus greening disease. You would either manage it with pesticides on your trees, organic or conventional, and then you also would help prevent the spread of this disease by preventing the spread of the insect by not moving stems and leaves or cuttings. For the mosquito, we keep water out. And so for this fly, like IDing the fly isn't super important for you guys as residents. You want to basically assume that if you're in this area or you're near the edges that you might have this fly. These flies, just because you're not seeing it doesn't mean that you have it. I mean, don't have it. And you kind of want to assume that you do have it. If you do see insects, and you think it's the fly and you trap it, or you want to just alert the CDFA, the California Department of Food and Agriculture, they have a hotline that you can call. I think I have a picture of that number, and we can look at that website as well. And so you can call them if you want positive ID, but I would just recommend moving forward, you assume if you're in this area that you might have flies. Okay? So, in one sense, it doesn't really matter if you ID the fly or not properly. You should just kind of assume you have it. And if you're near the border of the quarantine, I would be a little bit careful because maybe you have flies that they haven't detected. And we'll talk about an update on detections. But the impacts on the fruit is just that it really damages the fruit really badly. I showed you the larvae, and they just make the fruit pretty much inedible. We don't want the fly to establish in Southern California because it has impacts on our ability to move the fruit, to sell it. A lot of the fruit that we grow commercially in Southern California is not consumed. I think that we should consume more of it locally, but the economy is such that a lot of it is moved out of the area. And so it's important to protect our farmers to make sure we're not having this fly establish. And they have, just for the citrus crop alone, it was estimated that there was about a $16 million loss. They were hoping the quarantine would end before the summer crop started, but it's not looking like it will. So there will be an additional loss to our local farmers. And community gardens, where the whole idea of you growing fruit and bringing it home are going to be impacted by this fly as well. Okay, great. There was a question in the chat that I'd like to address. It says, please explain what is meant by fruit in this instance. Many are confused or misinformed on this topic. So that's a great question. So, in this case, when you're looking at parts of the plant, you've got your, you've got your plant here, you've got your roots, you've got your stems and leaves, and then you've got your flowering part of the plant. And anything that comes from the flowering part of the plant that has the seeds is going to be your fruits. So when you look at plants and things that are going to be a host for this, and we're going to look at the host list, it's just going to be this fruiting part of the plant. So it means your flowering parts of the plant are okay. It means your stems are okay. It means your immature flowers like broccoli are okay. The flies don't get into that. They don't get into the stems. The flies are not chewing on the leaves. They're not in the roots. So when you talk about what this fly impacts, it's just the fruiting part of the plant. So that includes squash, that includes cucumbers, that includes bell peppers, anything that's going to make a fruit. The plants that are not on the host list that we generally think of as fruit are strawberries. I think because of the way the fruit fly drops to the ground, I don't have any idea. That's not scientifically based. I don't know why, but they don't seem to bother strawberries. And they also don't get into Hass or Hass avocados until the little button at the top, when it gets picked, comes off, then they can go through. So there's maybe other avocados that are safe, but once they're picked, they're vulnerable to the fly, especially because we let them ripen on a table. They might lay eggs, or, if you have them outside or something, or they fall into the ground, they might lay eggs. But the Hass avocado board, I think they did some research. So they go by what's been researched. And so all fruiting parts of the plant are potentially impacted by this fly. And so they're the ones that could be damaged. And so we lose that crop. they're the ones that we're going to have to be, that got stripped, for example. We'll talk just a minute about the fruit removal. They went through the community and removed all fruit. So in the wintertime, that was mostly citrus, persimmons, pomegranates, a few overwintered tomatoes or something like that. But that was mostly what was removed during the winter. During the summer, it's a different story, and so we'll look at that. And just impacts on the general food system. Over 800,000 pounds of fruit were removed and put in the landfill to try to break the fly life cycle. I need to put a graphic of the fly life cycle. But you've got the fly, it lays eggs in the fruit. The eggs hatch and fall into the ground. They are dormant in the ground or they're pupating in the ground. And then they emerge from the ground as flies. They feed and lay eggs on the fruit. The cycle continues. So over the winter, the flies in the ground tend to go dormant, and they also can be impacted by rain and cold temperatures. And so they removed over 800,000 pounds of fruit from about 2,000 properties in these core areas where they found most of the flies. And so that seems so far to be an effective strategy, because it definitely seems like it's broken the cycle. I do want to note that over 2 million pounds of fruit were actually sold out of or moved out of the quarantine area through compliance agreements set up. So the USDA worked with our local farmers to move over 2 million pounds of fruit legally and safely by doing different procedures that they can do at a commercial scale. But 800,000 pounds of fruit in the really heavily infested areas were thrown away. And that has impact on local food systems. We're trying to build up our local food systems. So we definitely want to make sure that we're, moving towards eliminating this fly. And, I think that it's important to keep in mind because it's going to be a little bit of a tough summer. So just important to remember that the damage from these flies can be extensive. Like with citrus greening, a citrus tree will slowly die over 10 years. And it's not dramatic. Here, the fruit, this is like, from the get-go, if there's flies, that fruit is not going to be good. And the eggs or small larvae might not even be seen, but be there and could be problematic. So, like I said, does it really matter if you detect the fly? I think it's good to know what the fly looks like. I wouldn't look for it, and based on whether you find it or not find it, assume you have it. I think if you're in that quarantine area, you should assume you might have those flies. It just takes one fly to fly through your yard, lay an egg on your fruit, have those larvae mature, and the fly moves on. You may never see that fly that comes through. You can check fruit for damage and look for flies if you like. But again, I would just kind of act as though you have flies. We really want to eradicate this fly. So there's no tolerable level of this fly. We do have other pests like the one that spreads citrus greening disease. Initially, they tried to eradicate it. They were not successful, and so now we just live with the infestation, and eventually, like Florida is sort of in the last throes probably of its citrus industry. It's very sad. But there's no safe level of this fly. And to date, there has been many quarantines that they've successfully managed, although this one in San Bernardino County, we have the dubious honor of having the largest quarantine ever. So that's kind of a bummer. But so let's look. Let's first give an update. First, does anybody want to guess in the chat? If you know your leaves, you might be able to tell. But do you guys know what this fruit is? You can unmute or you can put it in the chat. I was so surprised. Nobody's willing to take a chance. Okay. All right. Well, this is and it's not that surprising when I say it, but this is a blood orange. But look how red that fruit is. It's almost like a plum, right? Like you can see it's citrus foliage. But anyways, that's from the citrus variety collection, a really unusual variety that they grow. They are in the fruit fly quarantine, and so they're really concerned about, all the research projects that they have going on. They also sell their fruit for juicing to help pay for and not juicing, but like juicing and flavor companies. And they work with a lot of companies on like citrus flavors, developing new varieties. And so they are part of the quarantine, unfortunately. So the good news is there's been very few fly finds this spring. Up until it got really cold around the first of the year, they were finding flies, between 3 and 15 or so every week. It was ongoing. They kept finding flies within the quarantine area. Then when it got colder, the fly find stopped, which is pretty typical because the flies go dormant in the soil and the adults either aren't active or they die back after they laid their eggs. So there was no fly finds. If like three in March, I guess more, yeah, in March, I think there was a fly find. Um, but they found one last weekend. They found another fly. So the projected end date for the quarantine, and again, going back to like the biology of the insect, that's based on how long it needs to go through its life cycle. So once they find the last fly, then they count two life cycles, maybe plus that fly's life cycle, depending on the age. They count a number of life cycles and then they set the end date of the quarantine. So the find in March was still part of their original projection because they also calculate in winter temperatures, which are too cold for the fly to develop as a pupae and stuff like that. So the projected end date was August 11th. The fly find that they found in March did not change the end date for the quarantine, but the one they found last weekend probably will. So, right, up until that find, then we were probably only going to miss about half of our summer growing season. They said that the fly find could extend the quarantine from anywhere between 15 and 45 days, depending on the temperatures we have. So that's not really something they have a lot of control over. It's based on a number of hours above a certain temperature. Then it could extend it into September. So that's really going to impact our summer growing. So that's what I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about. Um, so good news though, is that we were afraid that when the warm temperatures happened and all the bugs started emerging, that there would be this massive emergence of flies from the ground. We really didn't know how many flies were in the ground. They're very tiny. And it's just really no way to know the number of flies. You just kind of have to wait till it warms up and see who hatches. And so very few have hatched. That means probably that removing those 800,000 pounds of fruit and putting it in the landfill, while it was painful to have all that fruit go to waste, it may have broken the cycle. So bad news on finding one last weekend, but good news on them not finding a lot. So if you are interested in a yard sign, if you are in the quarantine area, you can go to our county ag weights and measures office, and they do have yard signs available. I should have attached a picture. I apologize, but they have little plastic sign and they have little stakes you can put. So do you guys have any questions? I'm going to talk about kind of planning summer for the rest of the time. But do you guys have any questions about the quarantine itself? Essentially, the quarantine date right now will end sometime after August 11th, maybe later August to early September, but pencil that in that it's not going to end before August 11th, that's for sure. So, and within the quarantine, you are not supposed to remove fruit. And then we'll talk more about the recommendations to grow fruit, to not grow fruit. It's a little bit of a gray area. And again, master gardeners are not here to be regulatory. We are not here to enforce the regulations. We're here to just share what the regulations are and to explain the reasoning behind the regulations. The regulations are based on best practices that have worked for other Oriental fruit fly quarantines. One of the questions that I had was like for the mosquitoes, they are doing a sterile male release, and that is the most effective way, I guess, to manage those. And they're not doing and for the Mediterranean fruit fly, they do a sterile male release, and that's very effective. With the Oriental fruit fly, I asked why they don't do that, and I think I don't know, there was a little bit of a debate about whether, not debate, that just the people I asked weren't quite sure if there is an effective sterile male program, but the reason they haven't spent a lot of time developing it is because the organic pesticides that they use to manage it and the lures that they have are very effective. So it's just basically they're not using a sterile male release because it's not the most effective. There's other more effective management techniques for this fly. So we'll talk more the rest of the time about what this means for your summer planting. But do you guys have any questions about the quarantine itself, or what you can and can't do? Or we'll look at the list in just a little bit. Get a little stretch on your arms. Spend a lot of time at the computer. A little stretch here. Okay, I don't see anything in the chat. Don't hear any questions. If you think of something or you're typing or you were looking for the unmute, just feel free to unmute at any time or send your question, okay? So let's talk a little bit about the plan for summer. You know, a lot of times when I plant for summer, I just sort of, I have so much trouble with pests and with squirrels and gophers that I just kind of haphazardly plant things and hope for the best and think I'm probably not going to get a lot of stuff. And it's kind of a passive activity. And I'm like on my A game when I remember to water my plants. And I don't really think about if I was successful, what I would do with all the produce. You know, a lot of people are more disciplined or better organized than I am and are actually pretty good at getting produce from your plants. And if you are, or if you're like me, where you're just like, hey, I'm just going to do it, whatever, and let's see what happens. This year you might want to put a little more thought into it because of this quarantine. Now, so like I'm outside of the quarantine where I am, and there is a Mediterranean fruit fly quarantine to my west and the Oriental fruit fly quarantine to my east. So even though I don't have any quarantines within 10 or 15 miles of me on either side, I am just aware that there is an increased exotic fruit fly. This is one of the worst. I think they had 7 active quarantines in California, which was a pretty high number, and the square footage of areas that were in quarantine was a high number. The Mediterranean fruit fly quarantine in Los Angeles covers the Los Angeles fruit market plus LAX airport. So really, it's a lot of paperwork and stuff like that. So anyways, even though I'm not in the quarantine, I do know that it's a high activity year for fruit flies. They're sort of trying to backtrack a little bit at the California Department of Food and Agriculture level and see like what led to this. And a lot of things they're looking at is online trade, the increased travel after the pandemic where people were just traveling a lot more. Some of it's just blatant disregard for the rules about not packing a pest and thinking that it's not going to happen to you and you're not going to be the one to like bring a major infestation in. So there's all different things that contribute to it. So this year I probably will be a little more mindful. So these are some things to think about. You know, who normally eats the produce? You know, is it just you and your family? You consume it all on the property, and that's how you have to think. Even if you and your neighbor are in the quarantine, there's so many stories I've heard. Oh, well, next door they removed all the fruit and they never came to my house. I wonder if they're coming. Well, they were right on the edge of what they call the core area. So it was the area where there was the more fruit fly finds, and then they do like a little buffer area around it. So you can't assume that you and your neighbor down the street or even next door are have the same level of risk. You may have flies, they may have flies, one of you may not have flies. You don't want to spread the problem. So, you know, do you guys normally just consume it all on site? My grandma used to grow a lot of stuff, and then she was pretty industrious and you know, lived through the Depression and was you know, very organized. And so she preserved a lot of stuff, and she had a freezer for her stuff, and she would keep it over till winter and would make soup and spaghetti sauce with her tomatoes and eat apricots in the winter. And she had it all organized, but it was all consumed on the property. It was grown on the property, brought into the house, processed, and consumed on the property. Do you normally share in a small amount of fruit with visitors, friends, and neighbors? I know a lot of people who are sort of like the friends circle or the family member who brings fresh produce to everybody, and everybody either loves them, or if they bring too much, they're like, oh my God, here she comes. And if you normally are the person who shares produce, you're really, one, not supposed to do that, but also you don't want to give produce to someone and say they take it home. Maybe you told them about the fruit fly quarantine, but they were kind of half listening. And so they get home, they find a little larvae in the fruit, they throw it outside in their backyard compost pile, and then they spread a quarantine to their area. They spread a fly, which causes a quarantine to their area. So if you normally share with a small amount of fruit with friends, neighbors, and visitors, I highly encourage you to do it processed. It is technically also, it's not illegal, but the only reason it's not illegal is because the CDFA can't enforce every homeowner not to spread the fruit. There is technically, like, there's strongly worded guidelines recommending that you don't move the fruit, so you wouldn't go to jail, but we just don't want to spread this fly. So if you normally share fruit, maybe have a plan of processing it, maybe cut back. Normally if you plant 20 tomatoes and you're the one who shares, but you don't want to process it, then maybe you just do 10 because you'll eat half of those, but you won't eat all of it. If you normally donate to a produce, you're to a food bank or a church or something, again, you're not supposed to remove fruit off the property, and we really want to break the cycle of this, especially in an area where if you're like taking fruit to a church or a food bank, there's no way for you to communicate with the person receiving the fruit that if they find a larvae, they shouldn't throw it outside and they should throw it in the trash. Even if, if you gave a tomato to somebody and they took it directly to their kitchen and they found a larvae and they threw it in the trash can, even though that would kind of be the end of the larvae and they wouldn't spread the quarantine, you just can't count on that's being what people are doing. So if you normally grow extra fruit because you donate it, you might want to cut back for this summer since the quarantine is going to run through most of the summer. If you have a community garden plot, we are going to talk on Saturday next weekend. It's kind of an odd time in the evening, but we'll probably record it. I'm not 100% sure, but I'll talk more about community garden strategies at that time. And then, if you're not processing stuff, but you like to grow, maybe last year you finally had the best garden ever and you're on a trend, or, you're on like a good run and you've got seeds saved from last year and you really don't want to cut back on your growing, but maybe you are willing to learn how to process some stuff and find a place to store it, then check out our master food preservers. Okay. So, and also just tell people about being mindful, if you know somebody, because it's so easy to start seeds. And I know people who start a lot of seeds and then it's like, well, I'll just plant all 30 tomatoes. Well, at this year, hopefully the fruit fly population stays very low, but we just want to end this quarantine. We want to be done with this. And so the best way to do that is to just cut way back. So if you do have seeds that you haven't started yet, then definitely have this factor in. A lot of people start their seeds several months ago. So this ship may have already sailed, but know as that fruit comes in, you run the risk of being a host location for those fruit flies if you're in or near that quarantine. So what else can you plan for the summer, or what else to think about? Think about where you are in the quarantine. If you are within one of those 2,000 properties that was considered the core area, I should have put a map here again, but if you're in that core area of the quarantine, then, there's several sort of like smaller circles. And those are the core areas where the flies were found. And then within there's like, a radius, a buffer around it. So within this area, there was about 2,000 properties that were notified and they removed the fruit. If you were notified for fruit removal, you were in one of the heavy core areas. I think everybody in a core area was notified. You can reach out to the CDFA and ask them. And the thing about being in the core area, it just means that you are in an area where they have definitely found flies. You may be in the quarantine, but not in the core area, meaning they didn't find flies in your area, but you're pretty near. And so you're kind of that buffer zone. But in the initial fly, between September, where the initial fly was found, and the last quarantine expansion, they were just popping up all over the place. So if you're in the core area, I would be a little bit more cautious about what I planted. If you're just in the general quarantine, you probably could be a little less cautious. If you're in the buffer area on the outside of the quarantine, you could probably be a little less cautious, but I think this is just a year to scale back. Be aware that if you have more than 25 of, and this is not tomato plants, but this should say trees. If you have more than 25 trees, the California Department of Food and Agriculture considers you a commercial operation. So just be aware that if you've got 26 citrus trees on your property, you are under some different regulations, even if you don't sell your fruit. If you have questions, you can reach out to the Ag Commissioner, the CDFA, the Master Gardener Helpline. There's people there to support you, but just know that there's different rules for you, and you have paperwork that you actually have to sign if you're removing fruit from your property. Think about what you're planning to do with the produce. If all you want to do is eat stuff that's fresh and you don't want to process things, then, and you don't want a bunch of falling fruit this year. You don't want any wasted fruit. You don't want something to go to the ground and just sit there. That's not a place where the adults are likely to lay eggs, but the adults can feed off those fruits as they're on the ground. So think about what you're planning to do with it. If you love to process for the fall and winter and you do a lot of sauces or whatever, and it's going to go in the kitchen and go on the stove, or you're going to dehydrate it or freeze it, then maybe you don't cut back as much. But if you want it all fresh, maybe just do a scaled back garden. Think about what processes you're interested in if you do want to share fruit. I have a slide about composting. Think about if you compost and just make sure you're covering your compost. If you have excess fruit, just be more mindful. So now, and generally it's a good practice. But in a normal year, if you don't have an exotic invasive fruit fly, if you just threw a tomato out in your yard and let it compost, then most likely the pest that you're bringing is either going to be like rodents or something. You're not having to worry about flies. But this year you are, so just be mindful of that. And if the quarantine is going to be in place through the end of August or whatever around there, what can you manage under these quarantine regulations? So just a reminder, we're not regulatory, but these are the rules. Here is the words: to prevent the spread, residents, blah, 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 are urged not to move. So you're not going to go to jail, but they really want you to not move fruit off your property. They have stripped fruit in the core areas. They don't want you to let fallen fruit sit on the ground. Try not to let fruit stay on the tree. Sometimes this is another thing you could think about this year. If you have like a peach or a nectarine and you harvest over a few weeks, maybe this year you harvest all at once. Apricots, they usually are all ripe in 1 week and fall to the ground if you don't manage them. And some people in that case would, let local like raccoons or whatever feed on the fallen fruit. We just probably don't want to let that happen this year. So just keep in mind, these are the official regulations here. Oh, and this says don't dispose of your, but you want to make sure that, I don't, just disregard this last line and read in, you want to dispose of your fruit in the trash. Don't dispose of your fruit in a casual manner. Not quite sure the wording I was looking for there. Okay, so now that you've thought about all these different factors, then these are the steps I would take. We're going to look at the plant host list. We're going to decide what we want to enjoy. And let's see what we could let go of. We're just not even going to worry about this summer. Think about how we would process each item and keep the date of the quarantine in mind. So let's look at the plant list. So the plant list can be found on the California Department of Food and Agriculture. If you type in CD, those are not the right words, CDFA, and like Oriental fruit fly quarantine, if you type that into the chat, or not in the chat, sorry, into the search engine, and you come up with this page. There's a couple landing pages for this. I'm going to drop this in the chat. There's a couple landing pages for this website, and some of them, they look similar. They are all part of the same page, but see here it says Oriental fruit fly, and then the regulation and quarantine boundaries is the page that we're on. Here under information, you can see host list. If you click on the host list, it takes you to this PDF. So during the cool season, when this quarantine first started, we just went down the list. It's 3 pages, and this covers, there's actually about 300 host plants, but only about 230 of them are found typically in California. So we went through this host list. I was hoping that I could turn this into an Excel and highlight it and put dates, and maybe I have to get like AI involved because right now it's just a PDF. But so you could print this out, for example, and you could highlight. So in the winter, you had maybe apples and you had your citrus and your persimmons. So I just went down item by item and looked at what would be ripe. So now that we're getting to summer, we're going to have some different things. You've got some of your apricots are coming up probably in the next 6 to 8 weeks. Calamondins or calamanchis are coming up. You've got cherries maybe coming up. So all of these things should be consumed on site. Now, if you see small vendors selling fruit, they may have a compliance agreement where they followed a set number of regulations and they are allowed to sell it. Of course, there's always people selling things illegally here and there, but just because you see somebody selling fruit in the quarantine, it doesn't mean they're breaking the rules or that, oh, if they're doing it like anybody can do it. They've probably followed some regulations because they're pretty actively looking for people who are selling without the right permits. Cucumbers are on the list. Eggplants on the list, all of the figs, grapes, grapefruit, guava, all of your melons, your peppers, sweet and hot. You've got pumpkins, although they did make an exception for ornamental pumpkins last year because they said that the skin was too thick on those younger pumpkins. All the squashes are on the list. Tomatoes. Watermelon. So watermelon's a really interesting case. You see watermelon on the list, but watermelon has a really long time harvest interval. So if you planted watermelon right now, it's probably going to be ready in like September. And so the quarantine should be over. And so with that in mind, you can kind of do some of that timing. So here's the list. I suggest in my ideal world, I've printed this up, and in one color, I've highlighted things that get ripe in the winter, and in another color, I've highlighted things that get ripe in the summer. Basically, if it is getting ripe in the summer or in the winter, and it's on this list, for the most part, they're tree fruits. For our row crops, things that are not tree fruits, most of the stuff in the winter is like the leaves, the stems, the immature fruits. And so if it's something we plant in the summer and we're eating the part of the plant that has seeds, that is the fruit, and probably it's on the list. Again, strawberries are not on the list, and Hass avocados are not on the list. So with that in mind, this is what I would do for our yard, our imaginary yard. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to look at the map. I'm going to see where I am. So I happen to be on the border. Oh, and does anybody have any questions about the list? Oh, thank you for dropping the list. No, that's me. Sorry. Okay, somebody asked about blackberries and raspberries. Good question. Let's check our list. So I don't see blueberries. Blueberries do not seem like they're on the list. I don't see blackberries, and I don't see the wording like, oops. I don't see the wording like caneberries. That's what I would be. Uh-oh. So I don't see any caneberries. Oh my gosh. Okay. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm gonna get my computer just a second to calm down. I've done too much. Okay. Oh my god. Oh no. Okay. Well, I do not think that berries are on the list. Let's see here. Yeah, I don't see raspberries, so none of the caneberries. So the berries seem like they're okay. Great question. The CDFA, the California Department of Food and Agriculture, and the USDA are almost exclusively, I mean, they're going off this list. If it's not on the list, it's okay. So yeah, great question. Berries. That's awesome. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. So berries are a go. Thank you for asking that because that's one thing, one less thing to worry about, right? So berries are okay. So if we think about where I am, so I'm on the in between two big quarantines. So I would say my concern level, concern level one, you're in the core. You should assume you have flies until the quarantine ends. If you're not in the core, but you're still in the quarantine, it's like concern level two. You really need to just assume you have flies. If you're on the edge of the quarantine, I would be pretty careful. And even myself, so I'm on sort of like level four. I'm not in any quarantine. I'm probably 10 or 15 miles from a quarantine, but I still just want to be careful, but I don't need to be super careful where I am. If you are in the core, there have been some rumblings in the CDFA or USDA in the task force group about, maybe just don't plant anything. So for example, if you had like a loquat that went to fruit and you don't eat it and you normally just leave it for the birds, if you're in the core area, you might want to consider just throwing all those out or composting them by burying them or something. If there's a fruit that goes like I don't eat kumquats. I have them on my tree. Normally I just let them sit. Maybe this year I pick them so they're just not sitting out there and I make marmalade and give them to my neighbors or something, or I freeze or dehydrate them or do something like that. So look at the wet map where I am. I'm gonna look at the list and see what's there. So strawberries aren't on there. Caneberries aren't on there. That's awesome, but I love tomatoes. Tomatoes are on there. Peas and beans are not on there. So peas and beans are a go, and I like peas because they're pretty low effort. And so peas are not on the list. It is kind of the end of the season for peas, but beans are also not on the list. So those are some things I could grow. Um, what do I want? What kind of level of management? If they find more flies, and they're gonna come strip the fruit, do I want to deal with that? If I or some people really are not comfortable with people coming on their property and stripping fruit, and if that's something that you firmly believe in, maybe this is the year to just let it go for one summer and probably don't plant any fruiting vegetables. Maybe you plant some berries, or you do some cool season stuff, that I'll talk about in just a second. So think about that. And if you want to process stuff, like I love processing stuff, and then I go to put it away and I have a really tiny house and I don't have any place to put it. And I got rid of my back porch freezer. So if I'm going to be processing like a bunch of apricots or tomatoes this year, I will need to get a storage plan in place. So those are some things I'm thinking about. Remember, the cool season starts in October. It is right around the quarantine. It is right around the corner, and the quarantine should be ending. And we'll talk about a few other strategies in just a moment. There are some cool season veggies that you can grow year round. There are the leafy parts of the plants or roots, and if you find the right place, you can grow carrots, you can grow radishes, you can go let it grow lettuces and spinach, some kale. There's definitely some things with a little extra care, making sure they're not getting too much afternoon sun, keeping them properly watered, that you wouldn't have to worry about them being a host for the fruit fly. And so even though they're considered like cool season veggies, you may be able to grow those. Herbs also add a lot to a kitchen garden. I have a lot of pest pressure with rodents and like squirrels and mice and rats and stuff. So I've really gotten into growing herbs. It adds a lot to my cooking. It makes me excited. I feel like I've grown something, but it's not something like a tomato where every single one of them gets eaten. And it would be something I wouldn't have to worry about with the flies, because the fruit flies don't bother the herbs. So, probably what I would do is I would, like the things that I would plant like normal. Like I really love tomatoes. Hate store tomatoes. I would probably give tomatoes a go with maybe, and we'll talk about this in just a second, with maybe like a little caveat. Peppers, I don't really have good luck with peppers, and so because they always taste bitter because I don't water regularly. Cucumbers, the flowers always fall off. Some of the things that I've had more trouble with, I'm probably just gonna let it go. So maybe I'm gonna do tomatoes and beans I really like because they make pretty flowers. And let's see if corn is on the list. I can't remember. Oh my gosh. Sorry. I have a touch screen, and sometimes I love it, and Uh, Okay, corn, not on the list. All of a sudden, corn, which maybe wasn't necessarily my favorite thing to grow, maybe now that's got more appeal this year because it's not on the list. And then you've also got your berries not on the list. So that's awesome. So maybe that's what I'm going to just plant like normal this year. So maybe there's some things that I normally wouldn't do. And maybe I'll also focus more on my traditionally cool season veggies too. And so another option is to consider trimming blossoms. So maybe you want a robust tomato, and this would only work with the plant that wasn't determinate. So I've given this some thought. I'm not sure 100% how it would play out, but just here's a food for thought. So, if we don't want to have fruit in the area until after the end of the quarantine, but you have tomatoes started already, you could pinch back the blossoms. Maybe leave the blossoms and let pollinators enjoy them, but maybe pinch them back as they go to fruit, like if you're in the core area. So it doesn't mean you're not growing, but you're just managing those blossoms. And then the blossoms, you could reach out to our Master Gardener helpline or look it up. I don't know how long it takes from blossom to fruit. I know for an orange, it's 9 months. I know it's not that for a tomato, but say it takes a tomato 6 weeks to grow from blossom to fruit, then maybe a couple weeks before the end of the quarantine, I start letting the blossoms go. That wouldn't work on things that only blossom once, like I think corn. Corn wouldn't blossom again if you pinched it back. So that's not a solution for everything, but you could trim blossoms back to manage fruit production. Then you have a robust plant and you can allow those blossoms to move forward a few weeks before the projected end of the quarantine. We will know pretty solidly, unless there's like a random crazy find, the end of the quarantine, because it has to be 2 life cycles, which are approximately 30 to 45 days without any fly finds at all. So as long as they keep finding even one fly, it's going to keep pushing that date back. But once they don't find any flies for several months, and once we get into the heat of summer, very unlikely unless a new fly gets introduced that the old population really has survived with all of the management techniques they're doing with the trapping, with the treating, with the fruit removal. So we should know, and we'll do presentations and kind of give an update. So be on the lookout. Once they have more information about the end dates, we'll start posting that more on our social media. So consider trimming blossoms. And then you can also just think about, hey, I really want to do these things. I really want to share with my family. So I'm going to process these things. So maybe under processing, maybe you really want to do squash, but you're going to commit to processing it in some way. I don't know, make squash chips or something. And then maybe there's some things like, peppers. I always struggle with the peppers. This year, I'm just going to let the peppers go. So and maybe for trimming the blossoms, I'm going to do tomatoes. So my gosh, I'm like Dan Quayle. I can't spell tomatoes. So maybe for tomatoes, I'm not going to grow them as normal. Maybe the beans, the corn, the berry, the cool season, I would grow them as normal because they don't have fruiting. And cool season, you're not exactly growing as normal because you're kind of babying it through the summer. But for trimming the blossoms, maybe I'm going to do that with tomatoes. And then maybe I just love the eggplant flowers. So I'm going to grow an eggplant, let it go to flower, but as soon as it starts to make a tiny fruit, maybe then I'm pinching it back. Okay? So this is just something to think about, kind of the process. We're at 7:30. I made these slides so much shorter because I was going to do good. But I also just want to share, if you want to know about timing of plants and how long from starting like a seed. So maybe normally you would start tomatoes in January, and this year you haven't because you're waiting until like May or June. So you can do a late planting. The one challenging thing, I mentioned trimming blossoms back to control fruit production. The one challenging thing, or the one reason to do that instead of to plant late. So you could also plant tomatoes and have them be ready to go in the ground like the first part of August, so they'll make fruit. But the one thing is just it's really hard to establish plants in our summer heat. You've got to be really diligent about getting them watered in, making sure if it's too hot, they have some shade cloth. So just that's one of the reasons why probably it makes more sense to trim blossoms back. And you can let them have the pollinator benefit and then just trim them back after they start to set little fruits. It's kind of sad, but at least you have the plant ready for when the quarantine ends. And then you can also just sort of skip some of these things and maybe just go with cool season veggies. So if you want to know how long something takes, if you're going to do like delayed planting, this Johnny seed calculator is really interesting. I don't have time to show you guys. But here's the link, and I can share this in the chat. And you can just type in Johnny Seeds seed calculator or seed starting calculator. And this is an interesting thing to play around with just in general for your gardening. So, oh, sorry, I have the updated Zoom and I don't understand all my controls. So just for compost, you want to make sure if you are composting, and then I'll wrap up here, that you want to make sure you're covering everything really well with the compost. If there's any larvae in the fruit, you want to make sure that larvae is buried, either by a thick layer of mulch or in the ground or in some way that that larvae can't come out and hatch. And then you also want to make sure that you're not providing a food source for those flies. So a 6 or 7 inch layer of mulch would probably do the job. You can also bury them, or whatever you do, just make sure that that fruit is not getting exposed for that larvae to come out or the adults to feed. The official recommendation from the CDFA is to bag and trash all fruit waste. So be on the lookout for workshops online or in person. The CDFA website that I showed you with the plant host list, if you look at their if you scroll down and you can see the map, it won't tell you the end date, but it will tell you if the quarantine has expanded. The last time it expanded was in December. So you can check that out. And then if you are part of a community garden, the same rules apply. So check out our upcoming workshop in a couple of weeks. It's on our website for more information on how it might work in a community garden. If you know a farmer, I think most farmers are connected, but there is a San Bernardino County Farm Bureau that they can reach out to, or the local ag commissioner as well. Check out our upcoming classes. Check us out up on Facebook. Really quickly, the master food preservers, there are recommended food preservation methods, and they're basically juicing, freezing, canning, and dehydrating. I'm just gonna post this presentation on our website so you can look up more on this process, but the master food preservers will do future classes. But basically, if you dehydrate your fruit, then it's safe, the larvae dies off. Here's some information about dehydrating and some effective low cost or higher cost dehydrators. You can use your home oven, but that one you have to be a little careful of. And just, you're not baking it, but just drying things out. And here's a little bit more about preparing it. So this will be on the slide deck that I can share out with everybody who registered. And talking about the settings for fruit dehydration. A little bit more information. And you want to make sure that you store them. And if you see any moisture in the jar, you need to open them again just so they don't spoil. You can also look up other methods on canning and freezing on the National Center for Home Food Preservation. And just remember that we don't want to send guests home with these fruits, or with these larvae, so we want to make sure we preserve. And together we can stop the spread of this insect and get back to lives as normal. We're all working together on this. And so if you have any questions about the fly, reach out to the Master Gardener Helpline. If you have any questions about food preservation, you can look their website up or go through our Master Gardener Helpline to get information from them. And with that, I thank you guys for joining. Be on the lookout for more information. And feel free, if you want to just sort of check up on what's the latest on the quarantine, to also email that question to our helpline. Don't be shy to reach out to the local ag commissioner or contact the California Department of Food and Agriculture. We're all here to help. So hope that helps in your decision making for the summer. I will be posting this web presentation on YouTube. So if you want to share this with anybody and kind of go through their thought process or help them go through their thought process for the summer, then please do that. And so you guys have a great day, and we'll see you at future presentations. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.